Allies of Suella Braverman fear she is the victim of a smear campaign amid an increasingly acrimonious battle over her efforts to crack down on net migration. Now, the Home Secretary has been accused of asking civil servants to help organise a private driving awareness course as she sought to avoid incurring points on her licence after being caught speeding. It's understood the Prime Minister will now consult Sir Laurie Magnus. He is the ethics advisor to the Prime Minister. Labour is claiming that Mrs Braverman may have breached the ministerial code. Now, on Sunday, yesterday, Rishi Sunak actually refused to back the Home Secretary when asked for his opinion at a press conference in Hiroshima in Japan. Of course, he's there for the G7 Leaders Summit, although Downing Street later has insisted that he does indeed have full confidence in her. Let's see what the Prime Minister said.
Well, Chris, I don't know the full details of what has happened, nor have I spoken to the Home Secretary. I think you can see firsthand what I've been doing over the last day or so. But I understand that she's expressed regret for speeding, accepted the penalty and paid the fine.
So the reason this is so interesting is, of course, that Suella Braverman spoke at the National Conservatism Conference. She talked about the fact that net migration is far too high in this country. We know the government's target is to bring legal migration down from the 45,000 that are coming in every single year, or at least we saw last year. But the figures are due to be released on Thursday. We think they're going to be as high as 700,000, maybe 900,000 of people who are coming here legally. And the question is whether Suella Braverman is being pursued over this minor driving offence because it is a smear campaign. Are the Conservative Party actually deeply worried that there is actually a Home Secretary who is trying to espouse Conservative values? That's the question I'm posing to you this morning. Also joining me this morning, Tobias Ellwood, MP, Conservative MP and Chair of the Defence Select Committee. Good morning, Tobias.
Good morning to you.
It's a really interesting story, this, Tobias, and I wonder what your take is on it. I've been trying to work out over the weekend why this is such a story, because she's the Home Secretary. Sure, she was caught speeding. She took the fine. She tried to do a private course. Of course, she's busy. It wasn't possible, so she took the points. And then all of these sort of things fell into place for me. Do you think there is actually a smear campaign going on? Because Suella Braverman has identified the fact that illegal migration into this country is far too high. We have the city the size of Birmingham coming in every single year. You know as well as I do that the infrastructure in this country simply can't cope with the pace of change at that speed.
Yeah, I mean, some interesting points here. You actually invited me on the show to talk about the G7.
Sorry, I had to ask you this first.
I understand why you want to focus on this. You then posed the question about migration. Of course, we can talk about that in detail. It's an international issue. What's happening in the UK is equally the same in France and Germany and so forth. It's going to take an international effort to make that happen. And I wish everybody, including the Home Secretary, would recognise that working with our international allies, the source of many of these problems. Sudan is going to be the next headache, and we're not doing anything about that. These people are coming from countries that we've been involved with and then decided to walk away from. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, and so forth. So there's a bigger picture there which we can debate. But on the Sue Braverman issue, other MPs, members of the public, receive speeding fines. It happens. There are a couple of ministers have been banned from driving. You put your hand up, you pay your fine. You don't try and pull strings and seek favours because of your connections to try and cover it up. And that's, I think, is what's concerning many. And you touched on something there. I believe actually there's less sympathy for the Home Secretary because we are just beginning to return to normality after a turbulent year in Conservative politics. It's far calm now. It's far measured. We got statecraft returning to number 10 after a loss of competence under Johnson and a loss of fiscal discipline under Truss. Polls are narrowing, but we have a Home Secretary stirring the right of our party with her People's Front of Judea moment, seemingly writing off our prospects of winning the next general election, rather than getting behind the Prime Minister. And I think you touched on it in your own introduction. This is a complex situation. I think the Prime Minister is right to hand it to the ethics advisor and gain clarity as to what should happen next.
Let's move on and talk about Ukraine. You're an expert in this, and I mean, the whole thing is completely tragic on a humanitarian level. Of course, Vladimir Putin has claimed his first battlefield victory in a year. He says they've captured the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Obviously, we saw Zelensky yesterday at the G7. He sort of refuted that. It may be that Russia's taken the majority of Bakhmut. From your point of view, how significant is this? I mean, this for Russia may well be more of a Pyrrhic victory.
Yes, I think so. They've been working very hard to try and secure this area because logistically it makes sense for them, because you're going to get train junctions, you're going to get supply routes that are going to be able to sort of confirm an ability to then advance further from there. But the Ukrainians have done an incredible job to hold them back, and ever more complex weapon systems are now coming in from the West. Boy, has it taken a long time to finally get F-16s. You know, we got a year after this conflict began, we plucked up the political courage to give those tanks. Those tanks need top cover, and the F-16 is the most versatile aircraft. 3 months it will take for a MiG pilot, a Ukrainian MiG or Sukhoi pilot, to be able to, you know, transfer across to the F-16. This next 3 months will be absolutely critical. Putin is wanting to drag this out, probably until, you know, potentially Trump gets elected. But if we're able to punch through, gain terrain, that will actually, you know, affect the morale of the Russians, and could see us being able to flush out Russia from mainland Ukraine. That is absolutely Zelensky's and I think the West's objective now.
And just in terms of that, I mean, obviously Joe Biden has changed his mind and capitulated on this. He said the delivery of F-16s to Ukraine represents a colossal risk to Russia. I mean, it was interesting. He was asked at the summit whether he agreed that Russia's statement, so Russia said supplying F-16s is a colossal risk, and Biden said, yes, it is, but for them. I'm slightly nervous about the ramping up of rhetoric. You mentioned the F-16s. Obviously, that is a game changer. I think the Netherlands has 24 of them, and also other countries have some F-16s which can be deployed. Are you concerned about that sort of rhetoric? I mean, Putin is not someone you want to corner.
No, and you're right that him on the retreat is likely to be more dangerous in some senses because, yes, he has chemical, biological weapons, even low-yield tactical nuclear weapons as well. But that's a sign if he resorts to these, which I think he might, certainly on chemical weapons. He's done that in Syria, don't forget, just when he was starting to lose there. We should be prepared for that, but never lose sight of the fact that you had a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council invade another state, and on top of that, you had another permanent member in the name of China actually supporting this. So we have to bear in mind the bigger picture here. It's important the West stands up to support democracy, but conscious of that escalatory ladder to make sure that we're pushing this at a pace which doesn't then prompt a response which we can't handle. Clearly, what's happened here is they feel they can do this, and we're going to hear a lot of rhetoric, as you say. Whether the rhetoric leads to some form of counteraction, some going ugly, that's the factor, that's the calculation that both Britain and America has made. Don't forget, we've also slid across the table long-range missile systems in the form of Storm Shadow. We were the first to give tanks. We were the first to give NLAWs, those anti-tank missiles as well. It's been a graduation of us, I think, plucking up Cold War statecraft skills to look at our adversary directly in the eyes and not blink.
I'm really intrigued, actually. The G7, of course, the UK, US, France, Germany, Canada, Italy and Japan, all there. One of the countries that I find absolutely fascinating that was there is India, and the role that India plays. Of course, India has still continued to buy Russian oil and Russian gas. Does India have a predominant position in brokering some sort of deal?
Certainly an important position. I mean, just going back in India's history, when they gained independence from us, they needed a friend. They looked around and, bizarrely, they weren't going to choose China because they have a border dispute with them, long history of problems. They actually jumped into bed with Russia. All their military equipment is Warsaw Pact. It's Russia, old Soviet made. And so they have this interesting relationship, as you touched on, and therefore could be pivotal. And the more that the Prime Minister Modi stands up to Russia and to Putin, that actually helps our cause. I would say the G7 summit, from my perspective, seemed like a turning point on another issue that you and I have discussed in the past, and that's what China is up to. Increasingly aggressive behavior, luring other nations in to follow suit, supporting dictators across the world. It's now got the biggest military in the world and still growing. We need to have an answer, a solution as to how we manage that in the next couple of decades. This will be China's century. How are we going to respond?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, of course, Rishi Sunak said at the end of the summit, China poses the biggest challenge in the world to global security and prosperity. I thought it was odd, however. I mean, interestingly, of course, Liz Truss was the one, if you remember, that actually called this out and said China was actually a big problem. The golden era with China sent the wrong message back in, when was that, February? I wonder where your position is in terms of what we do, in terms of Rishi Sunak saying, rather than cutting ties, this is about de-risking and not decoupling from China.
Yeah, I mean, again, what China has very cleverly done, and perhaps we've noticed a bit late, it's monopolizing the rare earth minerals around the world. 2/3 of the world's rare earth minerals are mined by China. 4/5 of them are processed by China. And these are the things, all the clever stuff that's needed in all the complex kit that we actually take for granted today. Our computers, our satellites, even our complex weapon systems, our mobile phones and so forth. 9/10 of the rare earth magnetic production is done by China. That makes radars, stealth aircraft and missiles and so forth. So they've been very clever about cornering this market. And what Rishi Sunak is saying is, let's make sure that we can de-risk, that we have our own ability to be able to produce these things, but also stand up to China, because it's interpreting, exploiting perhaps the weakness, the wobbliness of our international rules-based order that's slowly ever out of date, created after the Second World War, but now looking, very dated indeed.
Tobias, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Tobias Ellwood, Conservative Member of Parliament and Chair of the Defence Select Committee.